Good morning, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our current AIDN webinar series, The Compelling Case for Global Giving. My name's Mark Cubitt. Like all of our presenters today, you can read my bio in the chat function of the webinar, but in short, I've been a passionate funder and doer in the international space for 15 years. Before we jump right in, on behalf of everybody involved, from wherever you're tuning in and joining us, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on and pay our respects to them and their leaders past, present and emerging. We'll also take our opportunity to thank them for the continued care of our land, sea and community. So some housekeeping. The session is being recorded and will be shown on various platforms, including the AIDN and Philanthropy Australia websites. I'll ask you if you could write your full name on your Zoom thumbnail, if it's not already the case. I'll ask you also to please stay on mute unless invited to speak when you can unmute yourself. Today we'll have both the chat and Q&A functions operating and time for Q&A before the end of the 60 minutes. Right, we had our first webinar where we set the scene, and that is of course available for you to go back and watch if you wish to. We had John McLeod, who told us that international philanthropy made up 12% of Australian giving. That's, call it $1 in 8. Also that there was a 90-10 rule, with the largest proportion of that going to our very well-known and very highly regarded large international NGOs. We had Mark Purcell, the CEO of ACFID, who outlined for us how highly regulated the sector is, and particularly all of the rules, regulations, guidelines they have around their membership. It's quite a rigorous code of conduct to protect the funds of Australians investing, contributing overseas. We then had Eve O'Mala, whose plea was essentially try funding from a trust-based perspective. Trust the partner overseas. As long as there's someone who's come well recommended to you, you should be able to trust the fact that they will spend your dollars wisely and in an impactful manner. Also, Eve talked about having a bottom-up approach to international philanthropy, and also about suggesting it's time for us to shift the narrative from whether we should be giving overseas to how we should be giving overseas. So today we're going to explore further the why of international philanthropy and move further into the how. For how you can give, we'll talk to a number of leaders in the sector who've partnered with hundreds of NGOs, community-based organisations, or single projects to make a difference. But firstly, we're going to explore the why today with none other than Peter Singer. Peter, I believe, needs no introduction. He is a world-renowned philosopher and bioethicist. His full bio is available in the chat function. On a personal note, Peter was Julie Rosenberg, our own AIDN CEO's first-year philosophy lecturer, and has deeply influenced Julie's thinking in the sector. Myself, I still recall the first time that I heard Peter's pond illustration. Peter, welcome to this, our first AIDN webinar. You were having challenges with your camera, so I'm not sure if we're going to see you, but over to you, Peter.
Yes, I'm still having those challenges, and I'm very sorry, therefore, that you can't see me. That was unexpected. But anyway, I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak to you about the global challenges of giving. I think this is really important that we think about where our philanthropy can be most effective. And that's something that I want to talk to you all about for a few moments. I got into this area because many years ago, I felt that the situation of people in low-income countries, this was right back in the 1970s when there was the crisis in what's now Bangladesh, and I was comfortably living in Oxford, and I thought I shouldn't really be just enjoying my life while there are people in such great need, and that got me into this area. And as you say, I wrote an article in which I used this example of rescuing a child from a pond, where there's a small cost to you getting your expensive shoes ruined, but you save a life, and everybody will agree that that's what you ought to do, even though you're not responsible for the child being in the pond. Just to walk on past the pond and let the child drown would be a really awful thing to do. And my point is that we are, even if there's no immediate crisis of that sort, as with the refugees who fled from Bangladesh or from East Pakistan, as it then was, across the border into India, there are in the world all the time people in great need. And if we are living comfortably with more than we need, I think that it's not ethical for us just to ignore that great need. So that's what really has led me to write about this over the years, that original article back in the 1970s, and more recently the book, The Life You Can Save, in which I argue that we ought to be assisting people to try to produce a more compassionate world, to try to help people wherever they are, and that we ought to be looking in particular at how we can do that most effectively. And generally speaking, because of the very large discrepancy between the income of people in countries like Australia and other affluent countries and those of people in low-income countries, the opportunities for doing good are far greater in the low-income countries than they are in affluent countries. So by opportunities for doing good, I mean for any given amount of resources that we're able to direct to this to this issue, to essentially trying to make the world a better place, we will achieve a lot more if we are assisting organizations that are effectively helping people in other countries, in low-income countries in particular. So a large part of my pitch to you is to say, while of course we are all concerned about our own community and our own country, and there are good things that we can do in our own country, we do a lot more good by giving to effective organizations helping people in low-income countries. And I believe that that's really what we should be focusing on. So one of the things that I then did was to try to say, well, how do we know which organizations are effectively helping people in low-income countries? And when I first got interested in this issue, it wasn't easy to answer that question. You could talk to the organizations. I was in Oxford at the time, and I went to Oxfam and talked to them, and they seemed like a good organization, and to some extent they still seem like a good organization, but essentially you had to take their word for what they were doing, and there was no real independent assessors of how effective organizations are. Fortunately, that's changed over the years, and there are a number of organizations doing this, but there are not very many that really do it in depth and do it thoroughly. For example, one of the big sites in the United States is Charity Navigator, but Charity Navigator is basically just looking at the paperwork that organizations submit, and is seeing how much of their revenue goes on administration and fundraising, and how much goes on projects. That's clearly not a useful way of finding out which organizations are most effective. What it does is it gives organizations an incentive to keep their administration costs very low, which, to some extent may be a bookkeeping exercise, but even if it's not, may be counterproductive, because if you reduce your staff, maybe even though a large proportion of your revenue goes on projects, maybe is sent to low-income countries, you can't really assess whether those projects are doing what you want them to do. So what we need is organizations that actually look at what's happening on the ground, that look at the kind of interventions being used, and assess whether those interventions really work. And again, that's not intuitively obvious. There are some interventions that look really promising, that sometimes have attracted a lot of attention, which when you do proper studies, don't work. So fortunately, in 2009, GiveWell started. GiveWell is an organization that really does look at the impact that organizations have on the ground, and they started doing serious research and got support for that. And subsequently, there are others that have got into this field. And after The Life You Can Save was published in 2009, I was approached by Charlie Bressler, who was somebody who had a career in business, but felt that that wasn't really everything that he'd wanted to do with his life, and decided that he wanted to do something that would be more in accordance with his values, and offered to turn The Life You Can Save into an organization, which happened and is now there. And Charlie was the initial executive director, and Richard Vikstrom, who's on this call with us, is the current one. And it's been pulling together research from different organizations, including GiveWell, but also others, broadening the criteria a little bit and recommending the most highly effective organizations helping people in extreme poverty. So I think that that's a useful thing to look at. You can go to the website and you can find a list of about 20 organizations that have been independently assessed and shown to be highly effective. And I think the work that we are doing, that when I say we, I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis, but I am the chair of the board. I think the work that The Life You Can Save doing is something that itself is worth supporting, because it's spreading the message of giving effectively. And of course, we want people to give more as well, but when you give to the most effective organizations, you can quite easily be doing, say, 10 times as much good as giving to the less effective organizations. In fact, in some cases, I would say, as compared with organizations in affluent countries, you may be giving 100 or more times, doing 100 or more times as much good per dollar that you give as if you give to other organizations. So I think it's tremendously important that this message gets out there, and that people know where to go if they are giving. And The Life You Can Save as an organization is fairly modest in what it spends. And over the last 3 years, we can track through our website $17 in donations going to highly effective organizations for every dollar that we have spent on promoting the ideas and the information that we're putting out. So I think that's also a very cost-effective way of working in this field. So I believe that this is really what we should be doing in terms of compassionate cosmopolitanism, if you like, thinking on a global scale, recognizing that the fact that somebody is a fellow citizen doesn't mean that their life is more important than the lives of others who are further away, and trying to do what we can to make the world a better place and help people as much as possible. I see that there's a question that's come out about does The Life You Can Save take donor funds? No, we don't actually take funds aimed for our organization. Aimed for other organizations. We do, of course, take funds if people want to donate to extend our activities. But no, we invite people to go to our website and then get information about the organizations, and then they can click on that website on the web page, and that takes you directly to the organization you're donating to. But it does have the advantage to us that it tracks the fact that you came through our website, and the organizations then give us the information as to how much they get donated through our website. So that helps us to track essentially the amount of good that we're doing, which, as I say, has been very reassuring. But we don't take any percentage or anything like that from the money that goes that the donor gives. So I know you've got a lot of other things to talk about during this hour. I'm going to be sticking around and maybe come back and make some comments towards the end of the hour, but I'll look forward to hearing what other people have to say. Thanks very much.
Great, Peter. Peter, if I could just ask you one question before we move along. Do you rely solely on outside organisations like GiveWell for your recommendations, or do you have in-house expertise as well?
Until fairly recently, we did rely solely on outside organisations, but we decided that that wasn't going to be fully satisfactory in the long run. And it was a big decision for us because, as I say, we're a fairly small budget organisation, and you need to pay people decent salaries if you want to get the best people to actually do that research. But we have hired Bilal Siddiqui, who's doing research. One of the reasons for that was that we thought that the criteria of other organisations were too narrow. And we had, for example, people interested in donating to educational charities, and it was hard to find GiveWell or other organisations that were doing research on education. It's clearly harder to track because it tends to be more long-term in its results. We're also interested in trying to look at organisations working on climate change, specifically where climate change is harming people in extreme poverty, as it's going to do. So we are building within the limits of the funds that we have available for us, which are, as I said, not great, but within those limits, we're building a research capacity of our own.
Okay, and the costs of running the Life You Can Save are supported by a number of backers, such that I think my understanding is 100 cents in the dollar goes through to the organisations that people want to support.
That's right. When people donate through our website, 100% goes to them. And we have what you might call more sophisticated donors who recognise the good value that you get by supporting the Life You Can Save. There's a relatively small number of them, but they have been sufficiently generous for us to maintain, and as I just said, expand our operations to some extent by starting to develop some research capacity. But we certainly welcome additional donors who would support us in that way.
Great, thank you, Peter. We'll circle back to you later on. So the Life You Can Save is just one of many platforms that partner with NGOs and CBOs overseas. These platforms have been active, some of them for decades, one of them actually for 5 decades. So this is not something new and shiny. It's been around for a long time. But let's just take a step back firstly and explain where these platforms fit in. Firstly, as John McLeod explained to us in the first webinar in the series, much of the international giving in Australia passes through the very well-known household names. They have decades of experience offshore, reams of information available to you on their websites. And if that's who you are very comfortable working with, well, they're very well equipped to tell you what they are doing and to implement on your behalf. Perhaps moving down a level in terms of size from that, there are countless medium-sized NGOs founded by Australians with tax deductibility here, the likes of a School for Life, Blue Dragon, So They Can, Forever Project, Sadara, Freo2. The list goes on, and I'm going to get in trouble for the other 200 that I haven't mentioned. A number of these groups, I will remind you, have been featured in the Philanthropod podcast series or in past webinars. All of these organisations are Australian-based. They're registered for tax deductibility. You can donate directly to them. For many of them, tax deductibility became much more easily attainable after the Hunger Project case in 2013. And we've all got to be grateful to Hunger Project for pursuing that case. In that case, it was found that a fundraising organisation based in Australia could register as a public benevolent institution and offer tax deductibility, even though the implementation of their work was conducted by a separate entity offshore. So there's an ever-growing number of Australian-based organisations active overseas that you can donate to. So the next step from there then are what we might call the giving platforms, like the Life You Can Save. Today, we're going to be talking to three of them, Give to Asia, Action on Poverty, and Global Development Group. I've referred to them as giving platforms. To be honest, I don't think there's one all-encompassing term for these organisations. Americans would refer to them as fiscal sponsors, but all of these organisations do far more than just transfer the money through to a country overseas. So for the first of these, I'd like to introduce you to Anita Toy, Chief Representative at Give to Asia Australia. Anita, could you give us a brief introduction of Give to Asia?
Thanks, Mark, for the kind introduction. I'm really excited to be part of today's discussion. Well, Give to Asia, we are a DGR1 charity specialising in international philanthropy. So we connect philanthropists and donors to trusted charities across Asia in any country, region, province or community of their choice. We provide donor flexibility. So our regional footprint spans as far west as Afghanistan and moving right across Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. So we serve as a philanthropic partner, taking care of all of the non-sexy stuff like compliance, navigating complex laws associated with foreign donations, due diligence, and grant administration, so donors can actually experience joy and satisfaction in their giving. Our name, Give to Asia, we predominantly look at Asia. More than 2/3 of people living in extreme poverty are living in Asia. The countries we work in are not well regulated. Transparency is an issue. Corruption and bribery is high. So making it more complex and risky for donors to support. But it's these countries that are riddled with poverty. So what differentiates Give to Asia is that we have a team of grant-making specialists and local experts on the ground, providing us insight on emerging trends that's happening within their regions. So our donors view this as a key strength, so because it helps them make informed decisions to reduce their risk. We were established 20 years ago, originally in the US, and have since distributed more than $400 million in grants to over 2,500 charities across Asia. Last year, we opened our doors in Australia, and we're really excited to bring our cross-border networks, our experience to Australian donors so we can empower them and increase their capacity to embark on their overseas giving. So that's who we are in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. So Anita, an organisation long-standing but relatively new in Australia. Are you starting to find new interest in this country?
Oh, absolutely. I think if anything, with COVID emerging in 2020, it's really opened up the eyes of our community and how lucky we are to be born or live here, where we're supported by strong government welfare systems, and it really tested these government support systems in Asia. So I think everybody here has recognised that the need is so much greater overseas.
And can I ask you which countries Give to Asia is most active in?
Believe it or not, China,
Oh.
India.
I almost don't want to believe that, but you're going to set us straight here.
China, India, Vietnam. We're seeing high interest of where our donors are liking to support, but really it's a personal preference. So it could be because we're working with a particular diaspora community, an individual who's travelled, the most rural parts of Thailand, wanting to give back. It really depends.
So if I hypothetically wanted to give to an organisation that I know in China, can I do that through Give to Asia, and what would the process be? Or does it have to be an organisation that you already have a relationship with?
Not at all. So we provide donors choice. So if you have an existing relationship with an organisation, we will work with you and the organisation on the ground to onboard to our network. So that's where our due diligence strength comes to play. We've got a a very rigorous process for due diligence. We conduct 2 levels. So a local due diligence to ensure that the organisation is registered, they're genuine, they're trusted within the community. But then we also conduct an international level due diligence where we tap into various systems and cross-check data to uncover any risks so we can ensure that they're a reputable partner.
So can I ask how many people you have on the ground then?
So we've got about 23 country advisors on the ground in the countries that we operate. We have a registered office in Hong Kong and also a representative office in China to help us navigate the local Chinese government regulations. And
is it fair to say, or would it be the case that a lot of organisations you're supporting are in the more rural areas of China, or is there poverty in the cities as well?
Absolutely, and it's both. So we provide donors choice wherever their preferred charity is. We can get into those regions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Anita. We'll circle back to you later. Next, I want to bring in Braden Howie of Action on Poverty. And Braden, thank you particularly for participating today, because I think there's a certain illness that's running through your household. So I really do appreciate you sharing your time with us today. Firstly, Braden, Action on Poverty, am I right in saying the organisation's been around for over 50 years?
Yes, that's correct. A little over 50 years now.
Wow, that's extraordinary. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to tell us about the organisation and what yourselves are doing.
Thank you, Mark, and also thank you, Peter, for your words this morning. This morning earlier in the chat. So AOP, as you mentioned, Mark, been around for a bit over 50 years now. But I think in the last few years, we've really sought to reinvent ourselves in responding to what we see as some of the emerging trends in the sector. So in particular, one of the trends that we've been observing is that there's quite a shift now to what we call a more open aid paradigm. Where new actors, more citizen engagement occurring in international development. There's more of a shift away from the dominance of the big aid players in the past. We see a shift in terms of how aid recipients are viewed, less as beneficiaries, more as customers of aid, where they are more able to influence the type of interventions that they get involved with and how they get involved with those. And also, particularly as Peter was talking about earlier, this increased emphasis on effectiveness and impact and rewarding the kinds of strategies that are really showing an impact. So for AOP, we've tried to shift our focus now to enable that open aid paradigm to flourish, particularly here in Australia. We see ourselves as offering a platform that a range of different players can come and collaborate on to build development initiatives. We see development really as a collaborative enterprise. It's not a sector for competition, I guess, or exclusivity. It's dealing with issues that are quite diverse, complex, challenging, and require multidisciplinary approaches to address them. So what we want to see is that more private engagement coming together to collaborate on developing initiatives that really work, whether that's from business, from academia, from, I hesitate to use the word philanthropists, we think of people more in terms of investors in social change. Bringing those people together to work directly with communities overseas that are the target of development initiatives, and to collectively develop initiatives that are going to work. So we're quite interested in things that are new, that are innovative. As I said at the beginning, that this open aid paradigm is really where the direction of the sector is going. and finding ways to engage people more directly on that enterprise and collaborate more. That's really what we're seeking to achieve. So right now we're about, we have about 11, 12 million funding that comes through us.
Oh.
We work in a number of countries in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, but we aim to be quite flexible and agile, I guess, in terms of where we work. So we're always open to new opportunities in other places, and then we'll go through a process of working with local partners there. One of the things, I guess, that differentiates AOP is that we seek to fund into the initiatives that we support on the platform. So we've just been through a process recently with the Australian government. It's a reaccreditation process for us, but that gives us access to their funding, which they then trust us to distribute as we see fit. They've got behind the model as we now have reoriented it, quite supportive of what we're seeking to do in driving more private engagement, more giving into international development, but also collaborating with businesses around their IP or their products and researchers around their work as well, to try to drive new initiatives into development. So we have access to that, which we use to fund into the initiatives that we support, and also funding to support the capacity development of the local organisations that we engage with as well, which we see as pretty essential to prepare them for this kind of interaction and engagement as well.
Right. So you mentioned, Braden, that you're across Asia and Africa. Are there particular countries where you are most active? Nicely timed cough on mute.
Yes, sorry.
You're a professional at this, Braden. Well done.
The radio cough button. At the moment, we have a number of countries in Africa. Tanzania, Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Uganda. In Asia, we have, generally our approach is to always work through local partners and build up their capacity so that initiatives can be sustained into the future. We're about building models and what we call products that can outlive our engagement in an activity. So generally we're working through local partners, be that social enterprise or other organisations, not-for-profit organisations internationally. But in Vietnam, we do have our own office because we have a very large program there. We've been there for 30 years. And so we've established a presence there that helps to manage those relationships locally. So Vietnam, obviously, then Bangladesh, Myanmar, Cambodia. We're also in the Pacific, in Timor-Leste, in recently, up until recently, Fiji, Solomon Islands. So there are Kiribati as well. Shouldn't forget Kiribati. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Braden. We'll circle back to you as the hour progresses. I'd like to now bring in Greg Cadman of Global Development Group, based up there in Brisbane, but very much global as well. Greg, GDG has also been active in the sector for a long time, since 2002. Can you tell us how you approach partnering with international CBOs and NGOs? Sorry, have we got you there, Greg?
Yeah, ironically, I was just explaining I'm experiencing bandwidth issues up here at the moment on the Sunshine Coast, where I'm calling from today.
Well, we'll see how we go, Greg, and we'll pick you up later if we have problems. But let's go.
No worries. Well, if you can't hear me there, just give me a yell, because I've got a second camera set up on the mobile phone and I can move across to that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, GD.
No, Greg, I think you've frozen on us again.
So it's about 14 years now. We established initially to meet a need. I'm frozen. I'm going to drop out and go to my other phone.
Yep. Right. Okay. Well, we just while we're waiting for Greg to switch over to the other phone, Anita, I just might throw a question back to you, if I may. 12% of giving by Australians goes to overseas. Why do you think Australians don't give more overseas? Do you have a view on that? I'm just so focused on this sector. I'd probably be someone who'd say it should be 60%, but no one's going to listen to that opinion. Do you have a view at all?
Yes, I think historically the term giving overseas has just been thrown into the too hard basket by many Australians. I think we can all agree that we're a bit risk adverse here in Australia. Even giving locally is a bit hard. So thinking giving outside borders is definitely a no-go. But it's been hindered by a couple of things. So firstly, charities in those developing countries don't have the same regulatory requirements. So it makes it really hard to know if the organisation is trustworthy. Also with the due diligence, donors get really frustrated conducting due diligence because they often don't know where to start. Yes, we've all got Google, we can conduct desktop research, but anybody can create a beautiful website without really understanding the emerging nature of those communities. It's really hard to know who you should really be partnering with. And thirdly, the Australian government has notoriously made it difficult for funds to leave the country. Mark, you highlighted earlier about, thank you to the Hunger Project to redefine PVI, because donors who particularly had a path could not give directly to overseas causes. So they could only support DGR1 charities because the Australian government, prior to 2017, wanted funds to benefit the Australian community. But now that these barriers are coming down, we're having conversations like this today. Hopefully we'll start having many more conversations and empowering many more Australians to consider their giving overseas, especially leading up to June 30.
Great. Okay. Well, let's just see if we've got Greg back there now. I think let's see how you go on your alternative tech, Greg. I think you're on. Yep, off mute. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, well, third time lucky. We'll see if you can actually hear me and see me this time.
Yeah, we're all on the same team, so just go for it.
No worries, Mark. Thanks for that. Hey, look, GDG's been going for about 14 years now, since 2002. We're entirely Australian-based, so started as a Brisbane-based charity. We now have sister offices that we've started in the USA, New Zealand, and soon also in the UK, as well as having regional sort of local field offices in Cambodia, for example. And our motto, I suppose you could say, is give to your passion. And that's what we've really enabled donors to do since that time when we were founded, was to support projects that they're really interested in. So we're in about 37 different countries around the world, with about 250 different projects and working with around 200 different partners. And essentially, we are a grassroots charity. So we're all about helping people achieve the greatest impact and not having, a huge infrastructure with administration costs. That said, we do believe that, there needs to be due diligence. So there is inspections, there are monitoring trips, and we're using Zoom and all sorts of technologies now to keep in touch with our partners who provide us with regular reports, both narrative and financial, on what they're actually doing. But it's very much a collaborative approach. We talk about the partnership triangle. So we have a project partnership where we have donors, supporters, philanthropists, funds in Australia who are working with GDG and with the in-country partners on the ground doing the work, and tailoring together what that project is going to look like. And we like to say, so it's not set in stone. It's got to be flexible. It's got to be adaptive to the local needs. So we've seen with the COVID environment that's happening that, we need to be adaptive. We need to be responsive, and we need to be listening to what the local needs are, and working with to be an answer and helpful in that situation, rather than imposing a restrictive sort of model that doesn't take into account what's happening on the ground. And that's probably us in a nutshell. We're all about, value for money and making a difference and empowering people and multi-sectors. So I think I've mentioned, perhaps in my blurb that we're about holistic development. So where one particular project might focus on a particular area, over time, we might see those areas blossom and grow and expand as the needs increase. And we actually see multiple, I suppose, leveraging of impact by working, say, with water and gender empowerment issues and education and WASH holistic-based training and so forth, which then leads into micro-enterprise training and business development. So multiple sector approach, I think, is also a big focus of ours as well.
So, Greg, how challenging has it been to stay in touch with the organisations being funded through GDG during times of COVID-19?
Yeah, look, it's presented a unique set of challenges we've never had before. I mean, we've got a whole project team who focus on doing monitoring every year and travelling across Africa and Asia and the Indian subcontinent, Pacific, etc. So it has been uniquely challenging, but we've transitioned to really adopting mobile platforms like such as Zoom, and we've also increased the capacity of our local regional staff. So with Cambodian network meetings, they're largely been able to happen locally, even though international visitors haven't been able to get there, and with empowering local projects on the ground as well to connect with each other. So our name is literally Global Development Group, and there's a sense in which that shared value of, hey, we're here to help one another and leverage the knowledge and impact and help each other in our own regions is also something that we foster. And we particularly see that through our international conferences, which ironically, we're supposed to have one in 2020, just after COVID hit. So it's been delayed for a couple of years now, but hopefully late this year or early next year, we'll have a new one.
Where do you hold those conferences? Here in Australia or overseas?
Look, we've had some in Australia. We've also had them overseas in places like we've had in India, we've had China, we've had what else? Singapore. Sorry, we shouldn't forget Singapore. As a regional transport hub, it was a good location to get people into. Hong Kong and sort of other places as well. So it's not just about trying to be, because it's an international conference, we've got to try and get as many people there as we can from across our sector. So usually we're looking at transport hubs and not just local offices, but as I said, we have had them in India, China, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Great, thanks, Greg, and well done for being flexible and flicking over on the technology. Great effort, but we will come back to you in a moment. Braden, a question for you, if I may. What do you see as some of the barriers to giving overseas, or are we delving too much into the past talking about barriers, and do you see more opportunities now?
I do see more opportunities, but there certainly are barriers. You've mentioned one that's kind of been overcome previously, in that now PBIs can give internationally. I kind of see that as a blessing and a curse in a way, because it does make it super easy for anyone to start something. It's not the starting though that's difficult, it's the execution of it, of actually achieving impact. And that gets complicated, it gets challenging. There's a whole range of issues related to actually achieving impact, and there's a whole lot of risks that come along with that whole process. So while that challenge, I guess, has been overcome, and I think it's a good thing in that previously, and still to a large degree, a lot of giving has to go through those gatekeepers, those larger NGO gatekeepers, and there's a lot of them who do fantastic work, but that doesn't leave a lot of space for the new initiative or the new engagement, that new idea and that new model. And where we've made big leaps in addressing global poverty, it's generally been because of some new approach, a new innovation, new model that's come along that then has been able to achieve scale. So while that was a barrier to effective development, I think to some degree, particularly in innovation, going the other way and everybody being able to just start something on their own and go it alone creates a lot of duplication, creates a lot of additional administrative overhead across the board because of that duplication. And it means that everybody's relearning a lot of the same stuff. So there is still the gatekeeper issue, and there is then a scaling issue, because if you do choose to go it on your own, you really need to reach a certain level of funding to make it cost effective and worthwhile. And like I said, there's a lot of loss of efficiency along the way in doing that, and ultimately impact, because each time we're reinventing impact measurement systems, the research that sits behind models and that kind of stuff. But I do see a lot more opportunities, because there are organizations like these now, partners who are actually structured to seek out and support that kind of private initiative and offer a different range of services. I think it's interesting that amongst us, I don't find that we've really ever encountered competition between our organizations. The people that end up working with us have not switched from another organization, or they've not really been weighing up two very close options. I think there's so much differentiation between what's offered that people self-select in terms of what's going to work for them. And I think that's fantastic. I think we've never had that kind of opportunity in the Australian market before. But that being said, I think there is still a lot more work to be done to foster that market, to stimulate that market, and to encourage more private initiative, and to encourage it in such a way that enables collaboration, which is actually, it sounds great. It's actually quite difficult to do. So I think, great opportunities to grow this part of the sector. And I think great opportunities for more Australians to get more directly involved with international development beyond just giving money. I think that it's never been a better time to get involved.
Great, thanks, Braden. Just going to go around the panel now and ask if you could each just raise one example of a group. And I warn you, Anita, I'm going to start with you. Perhaps one group that is being funded through Give to Asia at the moment, just as an example of what people could fund through your organisation.
Sure. So I've just recently worked with a donor who was very aware that Asia is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world, so the most likely to have a natural disaster. A donor wanted to support a small community in West Indonesia called Econisa Foundation, working to improve the livelihoods of remote communities and helping them build the capacity just in case a disaster comes. So it minimises the disruption of how they live. So these folks are in one of the poorest regions in Indonesia, hard to get to. So I'm really just highlighting that part as a really great group to support. So if you do want to have a big impact, a small organisation that's locally led, I would highly recommend.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Greg, GDG is, I think you said 250 partners, if not more, but can you just draw out one as an example of what you're supporting?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a hard call because there's so many. But one off the top of my head was, I was just talking with Josh in our project department about a project called Forever Projects in Tanzania. And it's working to help infant mortality. So apparently there's a high infant mortality in the community that they're in, and that can lead to family breakdown where children at risk are taken out of the family environment and put in state-funded care. And so this project works with the local family, the parents, or often the mother, to help provide infant formula for the first year of the child's life, and to provide monitoring and health assistance to help the child be able to stay healthy, and provide supports in other ways as well with medical interventions, and then to take usually the mother in this case to help provide some education and training so that she can start her own business. So she's able to fully support the infant under her care, and then keep that family unit together. The other exciting thing about that project is that it has a really strong community in Australia that is, and I think that's the other aspect that we can talk about here, is not just the individual or isolated, even high net worth individual supporting a project, but the work we can leverage by building communities of empowerment in Australia. You know, people who adopt a cause and make it their own and form their own community to support that cause. So this community, largely based out of Wollongong, is created a real engagement of ownership for that project, and doing local events, doing fundraising activities, and a lot of those things are activities that GEG also has a platform to enable and facilitate. And then they're all also able to visit the project and provide support as well.
Great, thanks, Greg, and that's a valid point you make. If you want the support to be long term, you need a strong community of givers, engaged givers here in Australia as well. Yeah, Peter Singer, if I could bring you in here. Perhaps we're still not going to see you, but if we can hear your voice about, is there a particular group you'd like to highlight that the Life You Can Save has funded?
Yeah, let me just mention one that's a little bit different. It's called Development Media International, and it started in Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in West Africa. And their idea was to spread information, health-related information about maternal and child health, hygiene, sexual reproductive health, early childhood and so on, to spread it through local radio stations, because people, even if they're very poor, they get their news through local radio. They can do that. And it was possible to demonstrate the effectiveness of what they were doing, because they randomly selected a certain number of the local radio stations and looked at what happened in those areas as compared to other areas where they were not doing providing this information. And they did find that, you know, more people as a result visited their child health centres or visited when they were in need. So they could demonstrate the effectiveness of what they were doing. And there's some quite heartwarming stories that have come out of this, including someone whose child got very ill, and, you know, they'd called the local person, the village person who wasn't really medically qualified and was doing various kinds of things to try to help that were not effective. And then they happened to hear an account on the radio of similar conditions, and they recognized that the child may have malaria, and they took the child into a health clinic and got the treatment for it, and the child lived. She would probably otherwise have died. So, you know, there's very concrete benefits that you can show coming from that, and it's a very low budget way of helping people. And when COVID then came, that of course was the ideal. They were there on the ground, they were local, and they had the ideal setup for providing people with what they need to do to recognize COVID and to minimize the risk that they would get COVID.
Great, thanks, Peter. And yeah, look, we were the first funder of DMI all those years ago in Burkina Faso, and I visited the project and saw it in action. And yeah, I would certainly second your recommendation of Development Media.
And I didn't know any of that before.
There you go. No, that wasn't pre-scripted. Yeah, and Braden, just before we wind up, a recommendation from yourself.
I want to mention one that not necessarily to recommend for funding, although it's always welcome, but more just as an example to try to encourage anyone on the call really to think about what you can do and maybe how you can be involved in the next big model, the next big change. We're involved with a program called the World Mosquito Program. It's headed up by a scientist by the name of Dr. Scott O'Neill. You might remember many years ago, we had some issues of dengue up in North Queensland. And he was the guy who really created the intervention that eliminated that from up there. Now, he realized, of course, as anybody involved in that work would, that the main burden of disease is obviously in developing countries, and it affects people who are more vulnerable. So that's where it really needs to be focused. And so that became his goal, is to get this out into the world, to solve dengue as a public health issue, and to try to do it for less than $1 per head of population in the target areas, which was a fantastic vision. But he's a scientist attached to a university. How does he get it out there? Now, he's a very renowned scientist and obviously got some good contacts. I'm a little disappointed in that in the end, he got his funding and his ability to get it started from overseas. He went to the US and Bill and Melinda Gates saw it and thought it was fantastic and had funded him. But, you know, we could have done that here as well. It wasn't that much to get going. Now it's growing and it's huge, and it probably will be the initiative that fixes the dengue problem globally. And they probably will, through partnerships, collaboration with business, other universities, working on models like social enterprise, they probably will get the cost down to $1 per head of population, which is just incredible. And it's a level that local health departments can likely fund because of the savings on the health system. If you actually, it's far greater than that. So incredible model. It's scaling now and will probably be the big thing in dengue control and in mosquito-borne viral diseases. What I'm keen to see is the next thing, and I think maybe even somebody on this call, or maybe somebody you know within your own networks, has something that may be able to be adapted with some kind of vision like that, and that could emerge as being a really big problem solver. So, you know, I don't think that we have all the answers here, obviously, but I think we have parts of it that are really important. And then you combine that with the local expertise, combine that with local target communities, collaborate on some kind of design for addressing it, have a goal to make it cost effective, and you can really see significant change in the world. So,
thanks, Braden. Thank you. We're going to have to wrap it up here, but yeah, there's a bit of a feeling that we could have gone on for another hour, but our audience might get hungry and head off for lunch. But thank you very much to our panelists today, to Peter Singer, to Anita Toy, to Braden Howie and Greg Cadman. There are a few technological challenges along the way, but we overcame all of them, so we've got to be pretty proud of that. Thank you to Philanthropy Australia for your support as well. The people that you've heard from today are all significant actors, but are just a small sample of the pathways to offshore giving. We've put together a booklet, which we are launching today on the giving platforms available in Australia. We'll be sending you a copy of that booklet with the wrap up, and it will be available on our website as well. Besides the partners that we've featured today, and I'm going to look at my list because it's long, there is also In Trust. There are Just Peoples, there is Move 92, there is Partners for Equity, there is World Relief. They're the ones that are in the booklet, as well as today's participants. If there's someone out there that we don't know about, you need to shout out to us, and we will edit the booklet and we will update it and put out another copy. Today's recording will be available on AIDN's website and on Philanthropy Australia's Better Giving Hub. Have you registered for part 3? It's on April 27th, when we're going to talk to a funder active in international giving, and we're going to introduce a number of organisations making change overseas. Finally, the latest Philanthropod episode has just landed today, so that's likely on its way to crashing the Spotify and the Apple iTunes website. So get in early and listen to that before we bring down those websites. This time, the podcast has Anuba Rawat interviewing Daryl's going to kill me for this, Daryl Wade, co-founder of Intrepid Travel. Both that company and Daryl's family's foundation are very active in the international space. Email us if you've got feedback or comments, or you'd like to discuss more about more and better international giving. Thank you for your participation today. Make the most of the rest of your day. Thank you.